come up with for this tournament. He's playing against Robert Gross, who is on just straight up blue-white spirits.
Yeah, a very nice deck. He's got a fairly aggressive version of spirits. He's got always watching in his deck. He's got basically all the cheap spirits that he can play, and is just topping it out with 2 Archangel Abyssins.
All right, so Chris Andersen is going to be on the draw. Robert's going to start off with a Mausoleum Wanderer, and after playing an Evolving Wilds and passing back, Robert Gross has a second Mausoleum Wanderer. It's going to attack Chris down to 18, and he just has a Prairie Stream for his second land. This card is going to be very, very good against the Band Company deck. It's an evasive flyer, so it can push some pressure in, but it is also just very good at delaying the card Collected Company or Dromoka's Command, which are the 2 big ways that Chris is going to be able to catch up when he's on the draw here.
Yeah, we were just talking about, you know, the aggressive decks in the format, and maybe this blue-white spirits deck is, you know, if you're looking for an aggressive deck, this is one of the decks that you should really look to, because it does get to start with a 1-drop. It has a lot of 2-drops, and it makes very good use of being ahead on the board. You know, once it gets ahead, it's hard for other decks to catch up.
All right, well, Chris just has a Plains for his turn. And is going to pass. Robert has another island. He's going to attack for 2 with his 2 Mausoleum Wanderers. And then just pass the turn back to Chris. We have to be worried here of something like Spell Queller as a way to out-tempo our opponent on turn 3.
Yeah, and the fact that Chris didn't have a 2-drop bodes pretty poorly for him.
All right, well, here is a Nibblegast Herald on Chris's end step for Robert. And Chris is going to use his own Spell Queller to counter it. That's going to give him a 2/3 blocker, which is going to be pretty good in this instance. Let's see if Robert's able to push some damage through it.
So one thing that's been a little bit of a hole in a lot of the blue-white spirits decks that I've seen is that they don't play very many removal spells. Robert Gross, if a creature is on the board, his only way to deal with it is 3 Declaration in Stones, which I have to imagine there's got to be a better way to do things. But that's how a lot of these blue-white spirits decks are. And because of that, a lot of times if you do just have 1 flying blocker, it can kind of blunt your entire offense.
All right, well, here we have Chris is going to try a Duskwatch Recruiter on his main phase. Robert's going to snag it with a Spell Queller, and Chris is just going to pass the turn back. The 2/3 body on Spell Queller is really relevant. It does a good job at, you know, protecting. It does a good job at playing defense in the face of smaller creatures.
One thing that's nice here is because Robert is playing 2 spirits on this turn, it's going to bump both of his Mausoleum Wanderers up to 3/3s, and they're going to be able to bash in.
So we're going to have 2 3/3s are going to come in. Chris is going to take all of the damage and fall down to 10. Now that he gets into 5 mana territory here, though, a Collected Company could just easily be a card he can use here to kill off both of those Mausoleum Wanderers.
Yeah, I really like casting Collected Company here. He may choose to wait if he has another reasonable play. And this is actually a pretty nice way to go about it.
Yeah, so Chris is going to play his 5th land, use a Reflector Mage to bounce that Spell Queller back to Robert's hand. He does have 2 copies of Selfless Spirit and 2 Mausoleum Wanderers on the battlefield. None of them can effectively attack through that Spell Queller, though.
And what's nice about this board state for Chris Andersen is so long as his Spell Queller can play some defense, his Duskwatch Recruiter can generate a lot of value.
Right, so Robert is just going to attack with all of his creatures. Chris is going to put his Spell Queller in front of one of the Selfless Spirits. He will take 4 damage from a Selfless Spirit and 2 Mausoleum Wanderers and fall down to 6. Robert's going to pass the turn without a play, and that Duskwatch Recruiter will transform into a Kralin Horde Howler. Now Chris can go into 6 mana territory. He can actually pay for both of those Mausoleum Wanderers, but he has to be aware that there is still a Spell Queller in Robert's hand.
Yeah, I think because of the Spell Queller that Chris knows about, he's unlikely to cast the Collected Company. He may try to pick a better spot when Robert taps a little lower.
He is just going to attack for 5 with the Howler and the Reflector Mage. Pass the turn back to Robert, who is at 15 life. He will draw for the turn, and let's see how he decides to play this turn. Looks like his hand is Evolving Wilds and Spell Queller. He does have 5 lands already on the battlefield, a Selfless Spirit, and 2 Mausoleum Wanderers.
Yeah, it's going to be a little hard for Robert to close the game out from this position. Even though he has done a lot of work to take Chris down. Chris is going to start leveraging his more powerful spells, his access to card advantage, and Robert doesn't have a lot of good ways of playing to the board. So once he runs into some flying defense, it's going to be hard for him to overcome it.
Robert is just going to play the Evolving Wilds and pass the turn back to Chris. Chris will draw for the turn. He's going to play a Plains, crash in for 5 yet again with his Howler and Reflector Mage, dropping Robert down to 10, then pass the turn. Robert will use an Evolving Wilds on Chris's end step. He's going to go find another Plains. Let's see if he can draw some kind of action.
Chris would love if this Howler would flip back to a Recruiter. I mean, he would have been able to potentially draw like 4 creatures by now if it had not flipped.
And well, Robert is going to draw for the turn, and it doesn't look like it's a land. Ooh, it's a Bygone Bishop, so this is going to pump his Mausoleum Wanderers up to 2/2s. And that's a 2/3 body itself.
Yeah, and what's particularly nice about this is it's going to give Robert some access to card advantage, as well as it puts Chris on a 1-turn clock.
All right, so Chris is going to, Robert's going to attack with a Selfless Spirit and 2 copies of Mausoleum Wanderer. Chris would put that Spell Queller in front of Selfless Spirit. He's going to take 4 points of damage and fall down to 2. Robert's going to pass the turn back. This is pretty treacherous for Chris since he knows that Robert still has that Spell Queller in hand. So he could potentially have multiple lethal attackers. Chris is going to reveal a hand that appeared to be 5 lands and a Collected Company, and scoop it up and head on to game 2 here in this match against Robert Goss. Blue-White Spirits will pick up the first game over Bant Company.
Yeah, pretty unfortunate draw from Chris, but I think that he's generally going to be favored in the matchup, and with a little bit of sideboarding, he's going to be even more advantaged.
So let's go ahead and take a look at the sideboards and see if we can figure out how everybody is going to change up their deck. Looks like we have 2 Declaration in Stone, 1 Tireless Tracker, 3 Lambholt Pacifist, 1 Nissa Vastwood Seer, 3 Tragic Arrogance, 2 Ojutai's Command, 2 Negate, and a Tamiyo Field Researcher. How do you think Chris is going to change his deck up here?
So the card that jumps out to me the most is Tragic Arrogance. I would love for him to bring that in, and then also the Nissa Vastwood Seer to help make sure that he hits his land drops, although that can be a little dicey. He could also consider Lambholt Pacifist if he just wants to be aggressive and race. I don't think that's going to be the best way to go. He can also consider Ojutai's Command. It can help buffer his life total, but he does need to be careful about how he uses it and make sure that it doesn't get tagged by a Spell Queller.
So let's take a look at Robert's side. We have 2 Gideon Ally of Zendikar, 1 Secure the Waste, 1 Selfless Spirit, 2 Blessed Alliance, 2 Negate, 2 Summary Dismissal, 2 Tragic Arrogance, 2 Stasis Snare, and 1 copy of Ojutai's Command. How do we think Robert's going to sideboard?
So Robert has a lot more options, and there's a few different ways he could go about this. He could board in some of his more mid-rangey elements. I think I would like him to keep his deck aggressive, and so I think I would like him to just bring in the Selfless Spirit so he has more redundancy at his 2-drop slot, and I would like to see him bring in the 2 Stasis Snare. Even though there's Dromoko's Command, he has 4 Always Watching to play a little bit of guard duty, and the Stasis Snare can be pivotal in keeping air control. So there's some other cards that he could bring in, like Ojutai's Command, Gideon, and Secure the Waste, so that he can go bigger, be more mid-rangey, or Negates to fight counter wars. But I would like it if he just kept his deck lean and aggressive, and I think that's going to be the best way for him to win, because he is the aggro deck in this matchup. He does not have access to the card advantage that Chris does.
Yeah, when you have those 1-drops that you're wanting to attack with, even though one of the purposes that they serve is to disrupt the opponent's game plan, you still have to try and end the game before they become irrelevant.
Right.
So while the players are finishing up their sideboarding here, let's take a quick second and talk about the SCG newsletter. So if you want to get the up-to-date tips and tricks on how to build your deck, sideboard, and battle, make sure you check out our newsletter. It's your source for Magic the Gathering news. You can get the latest on the SCG Tour. You can watch the SCG Tour Match of the Week. You can receive exclusive deck lists and advice, catch up on all the event results, and you can even read an exclusive cardboard crack comic, which is generally very funny. Sign up for free. go.starcitygames.com/newsletter.
Yeah, both of us have actually written for that. They have a pretty quick rotation of people who write for the newsletter. So not only do you get a nice variety of perspectives, but it's just the best way to keep up to date. You know, if you're only going to read one thing, it's a nice one thing to read.
All right, so while our players finish up shuffling here, let's take a quick look at our Chris Andersen information slide and learn a little bit more about the captain of Team Card Hoarder. He is 26 years of age from Indianapolis, Indiana. He has 17 open top 8s, 1 open win with an invitational top 8. His brother is the lead singer for a rock band called We Are Forever. They're actually a pretty good band if you enjoy pop punk music. He is a 9-time Hearthstone legend, and he started playing Magic at the age of 4, which is extremely young.
Yeah, Chris Andersen, he's a long-time great Magic player. He's a pretty young guy, but he's been just gaming and gaming and gaming all through his life. So he's definitely someone that I like keeping an eye on. He kind of goes in and out of the game every once in a while. I remember when he was playing Elves and thought he was going to quit for a little while. He got everyone to sign his Elf deck, but obviously, he just came back in full force, and here he is today.
Magic's never going to quit you, so you can really never quit Magic.
Yep, it's true.
All right, Chris is going to lead off with a Forest, and Robert has that Mausoleum Wanderer on turn 1 yet again with the basic island. This time Chris does have a 2-drop, so that's going to bode very well for him. Sylvan Advocate seems like a very good card in this match.
Yeah, and one of the good things that Chris can do is not only try to control the board, but also just race with these bigger, more efficient green creatures.
Robert has a Plains on turn 2 and a Selfless Spirit, which is going to pump his Mausoleum Wanderer. He will get in for 2 points of damage and knock Chris down to 18. Chris is going to fire back with a Sylvan Advocate and just main phase that Spell Queller, get the 2/3 body on the battlefield that has flying. It's a great defensive tool, and a lot of times, like Misbind Click from formats past, sometimes you just got to main phase your flash threat to make sure it resolves.
Yeah, this is a great play from Chris because if he forces the game into a tap-out style, then the Spell Quellers of Robert are a lot worse.
Robert does have a Declaration in Stone that he'll fire off on his turn. That's going to give Chris a clue. Robert does look like he has a 3rd land as an Evolving Wilds, and he's going to crash in for 3 points of damage and knock Chris down to 14. Chris is going to fire back with his Sylvan Advocate, fall down to 16, play a Lumbering Falls, and then just main phase another Spell Queller to get that 2/3 body on the battlefield.
Yeah, I really like these main phase Spell Quellers. You just want that to be a blocker, and you want it to be in play. You don't have to get tricky and try to do it inside of combat because you can get blown out by your opponent's Spell Queller.
It also looks like he has a Collected Company and a 5th land in hand, so if he's able to push this game into a situation where both players are tapping out on their main phase, he's going to be in much better shape to resolve that Collected Company, which will have a chance to pull him way ahead in this game.
Yeah, and if you look at this board state right now, Chris can attack, but Robert can't. So Robert needs to do something. Fortunately for him, though, he just has 2 out of his 3 Declaration Stones.
All right, so Robert is going to use another Declaration in Stone after cracking his Evolving Wilds on Chris's end step. He's going to crash in for 3 points of damage and knock Chris down to 10. But now Chris is able to cast this Collected Company on his main phase, and Robert's only able to tax it for 1 mana with that Mausoleum Wanderer. He will let it resolve, and let's see what Chris can find.
Yeah, and Robert has a Spell Queller in his hand, but because Chris has been playing in a more tap out on your main phase manner, Robert just hasn't had an opportunity to use it. And now Chris is able to leverage his more powerful spells like Collected Company to get farther ahead on the board.
Looks like he's going to find a Reflector Mage and a Selfless Spirit. He's going to bounce Robert's Selfless Spirit and attack in for 2 with his Sylvan Advocate, dropping Robert down to 14. So now we have a Mausoleum Wanderer on Robert's side, facing off against 3 creatures. He's not able to actually play that Selfless Spirit since it was bounced by Reflector Mage.
And yeah, the players are going through this a little hastily. We'll see what happens, but one thing to note also is Robert is missing. Oh, he sacked the smart move from Robert.
All right, so it looks like Robert actually did sacrifice the previous Selfless Spirit. I was just so excited about a Collected Company resolving that I didn't notice that. So that play is very interesting. He played a Selfless Spirit to make his Wanderer 2/2, attacked with it. Chris blocked with his Spirit, and then Robert used Essence Flux to bounce his Selfless Spirit, making it a 3/2, but also growing Mausoleum Wanderer to a 3/3, which was able to allow it to live.
And here we see Chris main phase yet another instant spell that's usually meant to be a reactive element. He just, I believe he gained 4 life and got a Selfless Spirit back.
Yeah, so on Chris's turn, he's just going to attack for for 6 with his Sylvan Advocate as a 4/5 and his Reflector Mage, drop Robert down to 8, and then using Ojutai's command to gain 4 and put a 2/2 or a 2/2 cost creature onto the battlefield from his graveyard, he gets back a Selfless Spirit and just plays another Selfless Spirit. Now he can fire up his Lumbering Falls, which is now a 5/5, and attack in with a 5/5, a 2/3 Reflector Mage, and a 4/5 Sylvan Advocate. All of this with 2 clues still on the battlefield.
Yeah, I almost would have liked Chris to just send in his 2 other Selfless Spirits also. This deck is giving a little bit more respect to what Robert can potentially do on this turn to play defense. But as it is, it's still just a lot of pressure. You can really see that Chris just has the bigger creatures in this matchup.
Well, Robert has a Rattle Chains that he's going to use to pump his Mausoleum Wanderer, as well as they can give one of his spirits hexproof, but it does not look like Chris is going to be casting any spells. So we have a 2/1 Rattle Chains, a 3/2 Selfless Spirit, and a 2/2 Mausoleum Wanderer that Robert has at his has to play defense here.
And it looks like Robert is just conceding and getting ready for game 3.
And so Robert is just going to concede, and they're going to head on to game 3. Chris Andersen will even this set up, 1 game apiece on Bant Company against Robert Graves. They're both currently 8-1-1, so the winner of this match is going to move on to put themselves in pretty good shape to try and win out and top 8 this tournament. Do we think either player is going to change up their sideboarding?
I think both. I think the roles still stay the same. Robert's going to have a slightly better time having the initiative. Counter spells are a little better, but I don't think he's actually going to change anything in his deck.
Well, I could definitely get behind that. I think that both players know what their role is. I really like how Chris navigated that game, jamming his spells in his main phase, forcing Robert to react. We'll see if he's still going to be able to do that while he's being on the draw here. I think he's going to have a much more difficult time doing that. Now, we learned a little bit about Chris Andersen before the last game. He's been playing since he was 4.
Yeah.
That means he has attended a lot of pre-releases in his life. And coming up here, we have the Kaladesh pre-release. And we have this new, sweet, awesome parody playmat that we do for all of the pre-releases at StarCityGames.com. So you can get your Bengali Rye, is the name of the character here on our playmat. It is September 24th and 25th. And make sure you register today because it is a limited edition playmat. Once it runs out, it is out. However, you can get those at your local game store. So make sure you let the proprietors of your LGS know that you would like to have this playmat there locally, and they can go to go.starcitygames.com/pre-release or email isp@starcitygames.com to get this in your local game store. Again, that is Bengali Ra for the Kaladesh parody pre-release playmat. And I love all these playmats. They're real nice.
Yeah, I like them a lot too. I particularly like that one though. Tigers are sweet. Also, that one's got big doughy eyes, but sharp claws to rip your throat out. So I like that combo.
What is it with you and ripping people's throats out with tigers?
Cute but fierce.
Cute but fierce? Is that how you describe yourself on Tinder? I'm cute but fierce?
No. That's really funny though.
All right, so we're going to head into game 3. Robert's going to be on the play. He's going to start off with a Port Town. Chris Andersen just has a Plains. No 1-drop for Robert, but he does have a 2-drop. That is a Selfless Spirit.
So can Chris keep parity and have his own 2-drop?
Looks like he does, and it's a Selfless Spirit of his own. A huge addition for the standard from Eldritch Moon. This card has been very, very good in all of the decks that have employed it.
So I wonder if Robert has an Always Watching because he chose not to attack here. Also does not have another land drop. We saw that he got stuck on 3 lands in the previous game, which still allowed him to function fairly well, but it certainly bode poorly for him last game. It's probably going to bode poorly for him this game.
Well, Robert does not have a 3rd land. He's going to pass. Chris will pass the turn after playing his 3rd land. On Robert's end step, Chris will just play a Spell Queller. Robert does have a Clash of Wills to counter it. Let's see what Chris wants to do with his 4th turn. He does have all of his colors available. We have a Reflector Mage is going to bounce a Selfless Spirit. And let's see if Chris decides to get in the red zone.
I think it's worth it for Chris to trade if Robert gives him the option to.
All right, well, Chris is going to attack with his 2/1 Selfless Spirit. Robert's going to block with the Mausoleum Wanderer, but he does not find a land. And he's not able to replay that Selfless Spirit yet. So we might just see a Collected Company out of Chris. And Robert's going to go ahead and just scoop the game.
Wow.
Just does not want to go on. He's just going to give up. And
Well,
say, all right, Chris Andersen, you bested me.
Yeah, I hope we have a backup, but yeah, that was it would have been nice to see more of that game, but Robert was definitely very far behind. The blue-white spirits deck, being mostly one toughness creatures, plays extremely poor defense, and he could see that Chris Andersen was just firing on all cylinders. He had more mana. He had his deck has more card advantage, more powerful creatures, and the game probably was decided. I would have liked to watch more, but
Yeah.
but I think Chris was probably like 99% to win from there.